I'm Jo Fenn, I'm the Global Director for AdGreen, and as Lauren said, thanks for joining today for this session, which is the sort of last part of our annual review launch series. So during this session, we're going to take you through the data and insights that are especially relevant for you guys as brand people, and then answer some questions that some of you have submitted in advance about AdGreen and carbon measurement more specifically. We had some sent in advance, but there may also be an opportunity to ask on the chat. So if you do think of anything, do pop it in as you go, and we'll try and get to it at the end if there's time. First of all, I just want to take a minute to thank our industry partners, Get Set Hire and Traveller, for their support, which enables us to run events like this. And I also just wanted to share why we've changed the format of the event today. So I think if any of you've joined our previous events that we held for agencies and production companies, you'll know that we shared the data relevant to that group and then hosted a panel discussion with those in the industry who were leading the charge in measuring their campaigns using AdGreen's carbon calculator. So those were the super users that we highlighted in the annual review. In the process of setting up this event, we've kind of had some really valuable feedback from potential panellists, which has resulted in the changes that we've made. So we've changed to a kind of Q&A session at the end rather than the panel. Namely that the brands that we approached who are already engaging with AdGreen don't yet feel as comfortable as the agencies and production companies in sort of positioning themselves as an authority at an event such as this, which is similar to what we found when we were trying to pull together case studies for the annual review. Brands are more sort of likely to be hesitant to sort of publicly relay their experiences and don't feel quite so confident in sort of sharing what they understand at the moment. And that's because it's obviously so early days for a lot of people. So with that in mind, as I said, we've decided to push back the panel part of this event, as we think it will have a bit more value in a few weeks' time when everyone on this event has had a chance to sort of digest the data from today, potentially start navigating carbon measurement if that's relevant for you as the brand person on this call. And we'll be sharing details of the panel part later this week, along with the speakers that we have got lined up. And we'd like to thank them for obviously agreeing to join us on that new date. We're really looking forward to kind of having their input and insight in June, and we'd love a few more. So to that end, we do have a proposal. We have one more slot left on our panel, and we'd like to offer it out to any of you joining us today. This can be any brand, whether you have a calculator account or not, because in exchange for joining our panel, we'll offer you some free one-to-one support with setting up your company in the calculator, engaging with the training, analysing your data, and becoming sort of on the road to being an AdGreen expert within your company, all within a month, so that you can join our panel and share your experience of this process with everyone else. So if you're interested in doing that, please email info@weareadgreen.org after this event. I think we've got a slide just giving that email address. Lauren, if we can whiz on one. Lovely, thank you very much. So without further ado, let's get started and tell you a little bit about us before we get going for those who are maybe less familiar. So AdGreen unites the advertising industry to eliminate the negative environmental impacts of production. We have two aims: to support the industry in measuring carbon emissions and then in reducing them. So you might be familiar with AdNet Zero. For those who aren't, this is the advertising industry's 5-point action plan to drive reduction across the advertising supply chain, aiming to help supporters to achieve real net zero by 2030, reflecting the latest climate science. AdGreen is their partner for Action 2, as you can see on the slide there, reducing emissions from advertising production. And you can see the other initiatives and organisations they're engaging with across the other 4 action points on that slide as well. So here are the ways that we support the industry in that measurement and reduction aim. So we have our interactive online carbon literacy training available on demand for production and creative teams and those who are in a brand position who are interested in sustainability within this space. Next up, our carbon calculator provides project measurement and reporting for all stakeholders, so right from production service companies up through to the brands themselves. Our reduction resources include downloadable guides for different company types, and our in-person and online events, just like this one, share news, ideas and inspiration. Everything listed here we offer for free to the industry thanks to the levy contributions we receive from participating advertisers. So let's talk about training for a second in a bit more detail. Last year, only 8.4% of trainees came from brands. So we wanted to highlight this number, as many working at brands may not know the training is actually relevant for them, but it really is. Our sustainable production training module covers climate science and key climate terminology, as well as detail on how carbon is measured and also reduced. Alongside that, you've also got the sort of a more in-depth look at the advertising production sector and its impact, and activity areas where you can reduce, and gives you a walkthrough of the carbon calculator as well. So it's really varied, covers a lot in an hour, and it's relevant for anyone who's sort of on the procurement side or dealing with agency relationships and so on. So it really gives you that good overview. You can take the training individually or as a company, and if everyone has taken the training in your sort of relevant department, we can also offer a company-wide training badge which you can use on your website and social pages as relevant. Perhaps one of our team can pop a link in the chat if it's not there already with regards to signing up for that. So let's talk about the calculator in a little bit more detail. As a brand, the calculator gives you the opportunity to see carbon data about the productions you're commissioning, as long as your agencies and their production companies are actively using it. There are two different roles within the carbon calculator: contributors and reviewers. Contributors are those organising activities for a production who enter the details into the calculator so that they can be converted into carbon dioxide equivalent amounts, which contribute to an overall production footprint. So that's the creative agency, production company and production service company you see on the slide there. So we call these the principal production partner. So this is the principal supplier of production services to the advertiser. So usually the PPP is a creative agency, but it could also be a production company if they're working directly with the client. And secondly, any third-party production partners we call TPPPs. So the TPPP is a production company or production service company. So basically the agency is the principal partner, the others are third parties. Reviewers, who you can see on the bottom half of that image there, are those who don't enter the details but have an interest in the project's details and its environmental impact. So that would be brands and their parent companies, production consultancies, and any agency holding companies who want to have that sort of overview. Reviewers are assigned to campaigns by the PPP when they create them, so in most cases by the agencies. And just to be clear, the only thing that you as brands need to do with regards to the tool is encourage its use and then look at the resulting data, which then gives you the opportunity to talk about reduction options and make strategic decisions for future production procurement. I'm just going to take a little sip of water. Now, I mentioned earlier that brands may be hesitant to speak about AdGreen at this sort of point in time, and I believe this data sheds some light on sort of where brands are at right now. So when the tool was first created it was launched back in September 2021. If a brand that an agency was working with didn't exist in the tool, i.e. they hadn't set up an account, the agency needed to engage with their contacts at the brand and encourage them to set up one. This was causing frustration for agencies who just wanted to get measuring, but had to wait for brands to have the necessary discussions internally to start using the tool. And so we removed that barrier, allowing agencies to create brands in the tool themselves if they didn't exist, without the need for any brand users. So they were still able to actively create campaigns, measure those, and then have that data sort of in their sort of collection, if you like. And you'll see that in a bit more detail in a bit. So in 2022, there were 500 brand accounts in the Carbon Calculator that had no users attached, which gives some insight into the number of campaigns being created by agencies. And of course, we're really glad to see that level of enthusiasm and engagement from the ad agencies. However, on the flip side, because that engagement isn't required anymore in order to complete those projects, many brands are likely unaware that accounts exist for their brand and that there are likely footprints already created in the tool for their campaigns. As an example, one unclaimed brand account has 69 projects attached to it, so there could be a significant amount of data waiting for you already without even really having to do anything except register for an account. If you want to check whether your brand has an account, which may be unclaimed, you can check on our registration page by entering the company name into the search box. I think we've got a little illustration of that on the next slide. So, why is data, there we go, thank you very much, Lauren. So if you select the company there, if your company name appears, it's likely that either you already have a user at your company and somebody is already there engaged with this tool, or there are no users, but there is data there as well, sitting behind it. So why is it important and valuable to collect this data? So by using the carbon calculator, you can clearly see high carbon activities and use this knowledge to make changes, either in advance of a shoot or on the next one. So we're now going to look further at the carbon calculator and give you a walkthrough from the perspective of a brand. Thank you, Lauren. So when you first visit the carbon calculator, you'll need to create an account, which we've obviously just mentioned. So as I said, if your company is already created in the tool, your request will be sent to the admin at your company if there is one, or to the AdGreen team if there isn't, if it's one of those accounts that is just there but with no users. If it's a completely new request, i.e. it doesn't exist already, it will come to us, we'll verify your details and create the organisation within the tool and then set up your account. Once you've logged in, you will see this sort of homepage, which might just show multiple options if you're part of more than one organisation, for example, a brand plus its parent company. For this demo, I'll be acting as the brand, which is called Not Just Cakes. And when I hit the logo, it takes me to the campaigns page. So on the campaigns page, you will see a list of all the campaigns assigned to your brand, Not Just Cakes, as well as a summary of each. And the brand will be assigned to the campaigns created by the principal production partners, or the agency, as we've already said. For each campaign, you'll see a number of details. So the status, whether the campaign is in progress, complete, overdue, etc. And the number of projects attached to that campaign and the current footprint based on all of the activities entered across those projects. If we scroll down, we can see the rest of the campaigns, and we're going to look at Autumn Taste in more detail. So when you click on the campaign, you can see the organisations involved. In this case, the PPP is Cool Ad Agency, our demo ad agency, and there's also a production consultancy attached called Consult For You. You can also see the total footprint generated by all the projects attached to this campaign, of which there are 9. I'd say that's an unusually high number. You might expect to see sort of a TV ad, a radio ad, a print campaign, perhaps 3. Excuse me. And you'll also see the carbon data split out across the different companies who've put in their activity data, including Cool Ad Agency and any production companies they've engaged to work on the various projects. So scrolling down, we can see an overview of all 9 projects attached to this campaign, which can be motion, stills and audio in terms of type. And if we selected the Crisp-tastic shoot, sorry, I can't speak today, we'll come to the project page, which is what we're seeing here. So here you can see the production details entered by the agency, Cool Ad Agency. This information is important as it will let you segment the data from your projects in the same way that we have in the AdGreen annual review, which we'll come to later. So as an example, you can analyse your average emissions by shoot day, by budget, by content type, for example. And when you scroll down here, you will see the footprint data overview. So this is just for this specific project rather than the whole campaign. And this is split out again by companies and by activity areas, and also includes an offset cost for guidance should you choose to offset that at the end, which we'd obviously recommend once you've reduced everything you possibly can first. And you'll find the activity areas split out with all entries visible individually, so non-filming spaces, filming spaces, etc. And you can also select to show all activity entries as well. And that will result in, the next slide please, here we go. So this is a list of activities that have been entered by the ad agency, by the other companies that you can see their logo on the right hand side for this particular project, but put into an order of size. So we can clearly see that agency travel is the biggest piece. And finally, I'd like to show you an important feature which is especially relevant for brands. So when selecting footprints in the menu bar, you'll be given the option of Campaign View and Project View. Project View will show you all individual projects across all of your campaigns, giving you an easy way to search and order them. And you'll also see above the project names the blue Export to CSV button. This will export all of your project data in one go, separating the activity areas and providing all project details entered into the calculator. And this provides a really quick and easy way to analyse projects in one go. Whilst we're here, we'd also like to highlight the different ways your production partners can use the carbon calculator. So number 1, to check the impact of one activity against another. So looking at perhaps whether a studio on renewable energy is better or worse than one that isn't. Hopefully you know the answer to that. To draft a footprint using information from a budget, so putting together a kind of, if you like, a quick draft of what the footprint might look like based on the information you have at that time. And then a completed or finalised footprint, which is done by just finalising the details you've put in at draft stage. So just sort of updating that as though it was a kind of budget that you're actualising at the end of a project. So that is how your production partners can use the tool in those 3 different ways. As an example, here we've compared the emissions generated per passenger per kilometre travelled by different modes of transport. While we may have assumed that flying would be the worst emitter, it's actually more carbon intensive in this particular case for one person travelling on their own in a car than one person flying. So this is London to Edinburgh. So this really highlights the value of checking in the tool to see if, you know, what you think is true is actually true. So we can see here that if cast and crew are travelling from different places delivering costume and props or scouting out various locations by road, this would really add up in the car. So in that case, a flight might be a better option, but usually that won't be the case. So using the calculator allows production teams to work with the figures rather than assumptions and be able to start sort of meaningful conversations with clients based on facts. So it's important that you as brands are part of this conversation. According to Albert, the carbon calculator sort of for the TV and film industry, the average production manager can only remove 15 to 20% of carbon from a footprint. This is because by the time a project gets to them, as a production manager, much of the carbon is baked into the way that the script has to be produced. This could be sort of potentially requiring cast and crew to fly abroad for the right weather, the short timeline to deliver the project, removing opportunity to search for renewably powered spaces and accommodation, or the tight budget preventing suppliers from offering more sustainable but potentially more expensive materials or services. So you can use your influence to make carbon reduction part of the brief and really think about this at script stage when you're presented with different options from your principal production partners. So now that we've shown you how the data is collected and analysed, we want to share some of the data that we collected across 2022. Let's talk about what we know from the data that's been input so far. This is what we published in our first annual review, which came out in March. The insights were gathered from the CSV download of project data. So just in the way that we showed you how to download yours, we did exactly the same thing, but for all the completed projects. And this is the information that we were able to get from that. So during 2022, the advertising production community completed 515 motion and/or stills projects within the calculator, essentially measuring everything that makes up a shoot plus the post, as well as 17 audio projects. Most of those simply included the audio post session time for radio spots, for example. Now for the insights in the review, we just looked at completed motion and stills projects. So as you can see here, 2,446.1 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent were emitted as a result of the 515 projects completed in 2022. Apologies, I have a big frog in my throat. 289 of the projects were under 1 tonne, with a combined impact of just over 83 tonnes, and 4 projects were over 100 tonnes, with a combined impact of 459. For context, the global average footprint for an individual for 1 year is 7 tonnes. So we had 4 projects that were over 100. Now, throughout our comms, events, resources, tools and training, we talk about carbon emissions from 4 specific activity areas. And we've also shown how they appear in the carbon calculator, split across 7, which you can see on the right-hand side. We list them in this order due to the impact that each is likely to have on your shoot. From the 515 completed projects from last year, you can see that 62% of the emissions came from travel and transport, and much of this was from air travel, meaning there's a really clear call to action for production and brand teams. So, what's normal? Well, every project looks different. However, what can be said is that across the dataset, the mean project size is 4.7 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. This doesn't mean, of course, that everything below this is good and everything above this is bad. It's merely a point of reference to measure projects against as organisations in the community build a data set of their own. So as you're getting more familiar, this is something to kind of have in your mind. And although the average size of a completed project was 4.7 tonnes, projects ranged massively from 1.5 kilos, with literally a guy going out and walking across the street and filming in a local cafe and popping back home again to do the post in his renewably powered apartment, to 129 tonnes for a very large international project with a lot of flying, a lot of generator use and a massive team. So we know from our data from last year that it's skewed towards smaller projects, both in terms of material impact and also budget. So on our next slide, I'm going to show you what that means. So the averages are skewed downwards. Here we go, thanks Lauren. So from our own production experience and insights from our board members and industry bodies, we know that there are many, many more projects akin to those in the 50 tonnes and above category being produced across the industry, both in the UK and beyond, which are not yet being recorded. So we also cut our data by spend per shoot day to see if what kind of result we get. And when we looked at projects with a budget of 50k or over per shoot day, the average size jumped up to 12.8 tonnes. So if that's a budget that's sort of more familiar to you, this figure is going to be more relevant as one to hold in your head. And we really hope that this snapshot of 2022's completed projects will give everyone a sense of the current industry baseline. It's clear that more engagement is needed, and this is where you come in. All of those unclaimed brand accounts, we'd love to see a whole load of them get claimed. Encouraging your agencies and production companies to engage, ideally after you have, will really help grow our data set and result in a more representative picture of the industry's emissions. And of course, as more large projects are recorded in the tool, the average project size will rise along with the other related data points. So we would expect these averages to go up over the next couple of years at least, whilst we get more projects into the tool. I'd like to kind of wrap up this bit with a note on the AdGreen levy. And I notice we've got some international callers. This won't be relevant for everyone, or not callers, joiners, participants. So this won't be relevant for everyone. But at AdGreen, we don't consult on individual productions. We focus on the bigger picture, creating tools, resources and training for everyone to access in order to accelerate change. So our support at the moment is UK based, but the carbon calculator uses local carbon factors when calculating emissions from production activities, wherever they take place. So everything we offer can be used internationally. To provide the tools, resources and training free at the point of use across the advertising production community, a levy on applicable production spend has been introduced, which is paid by participating advertisers to UK-based agencies. There are two ways to contribute to the levy if you aren't already, but you're working with UK-based principal production partners or agencies. The first option is for them to include the levy as part of the production budget for each project. They will then collect the payment on our behalf and then pass it to us each quarter. So that's kind of done via your agencies. And the second option is to contribute directly to AdGreen by sending a payment which is based on an estimated annual production spend, and we apply the levy percentage to that. And this is then discounted to account for the upfrontness of that payment, which means we can then plan projects in advance. And we can also provide a little bit of onboarding support and sort of data support as well, to sort of as a bit of a thank you for that upfront payment. So here are some of our registered levy collectors. So if you're a brand on this call working with any of these agencies, it's likely that the levy has been added to your production estimates. And whilst the advertiser has the right to remove the levy, for most it's seen as a very small contribution. I think it's £2.50 for every £1,000 spent, so pretty small, I'd hope you'd agree. So it's a payment that really allows us to continue supporting the advertising industry and reducing emissions from production. And the levy is our predominant source of income at this stage. And the money raised goes into funding our small team. We are a team of 5, but some of us are also part-time. Developing the calculator and keeping it running. And it also enables us to introduce further training and resources to facilitate the reduction. So not just the measurement, but the reduction as well. If you're interested in contributing to the levy, please visit our website to get more information about that as well. And so we'll now turn to the Q&A part of this event, and I'm going to kind of ask Lauren to join me so I can have a sip of my water and hopefully recover this frog from my throat. And we're going to answer some of your questions that you posed to us via the Eventbrite as well. Lovely.
Okay, great. So The first question we have, which was sent through, is to what extent is the calculator being used by overseas clients, agencies or production companies?
Great, so I think we've got some information from the annual review here. So what we presented in the review was a map on the countries that were using the tool. So this is where the completed projects originated from. So as you'd expect, the UK was the highest. We're a UK-based project. It started here. This is where we're sort of, I guess, most well known. The USA was second, with a total of 55 projects that were in dollars. So that's the majority of their projects. And then we have Ireland next up, where there's also an AdNet Zero presence, and the Netherlands as well, where we have some partners offering support locally on the ground there too. So although we're a UK-based project, as I mentioned, and the levy operates in the UK, we do have some support in the Netherlands and also a US director working in the US as well. So if you're in those countries and would like to reach out to those local teams, let us know and we can put you in touch if you aren't already. So we do know it's being used around the world. We also have a lot of projects that have been created in different countries this year that we hope to include in next year's data set, or this year's, but publishing next year, to kind of show you hopefully an update on this map and a few more countries that are engaging as well. So it's growing all the time, and we're really excited to kind of support different productions around the world as best we can at the moment, whilst we have our small team and are funded by the levy, which we are looking to potentially change in the future to help us support people in other territories. So watch this space on that one as well.
Great. So what advice do you have for holding a creative agency accountable for a responsible shoot, in particular when using lots of third parties and abroad where it's even harder to trace what steps have been taken and evidence it back?
It's a really good question. So I think this is about collaboration. It's not just sort of, we really want you guys to do this, off you go, come back to us right at the end. It's a collaborative process kind of throughout production. So really kind of making sure it's known what is expected of them. We would love you to use this tool because we are interested in the information. We want to collaborate with you. We want to understand what we can do better, where our biggest things are. So I think first up is really making sure they know it's a collaborative effort. This isn't just a kind of a client request that needs to be, added to a big sort of, a big project where there's lots of other things happening. So that would be the first thing to say. I think using the tool obviously helps them to track what's happening and helps them to pass some of that responsibility to the production partners they're working with, whether they're abroad or, in their own country. And then I think after that, it's really about sort of asking them to create a draft before the shoot commences. So based on the budget that you might have signed off, or that might be sort of, coming up to being a final version, perhaps prior to sign off, so that you do have some visibility before you get started as to where the big pieces are, so that some decisions can be made before you get started. So for example, if you've got flights in your budget, but they turn out to be the biggest part, which in most cases they are, apart from the Edinburgh example we showed you earlier, that then gives you an opportunity to think about whether the location could change, whether the amount of people could change. And in the bigger term, the bigger sense, the longer term, there's an opportunity to kind of review your data once you have enough of it, to see if there are trends. Is air travel always the biggest thing? Is it something else? Maybe it's the fact that you're shooting in studios where there's not a renewable power option, and that's actually your biggest piece. Or is it that you're always on location, or are you always bringing in product from other countries, for example? There's lots of things that could be having an impact on the size of your production, and it might not always be something that the production company has decided. It might be something that inadvertently has come from you that you maybe hadn't realised. So there's definitely a collaboration option, and sort of having the sort of ability for them to know that you can be flexible, that you might need to sort of add in some things to help that be more or less carbon intensive, I should say. There's a case study we put in our annual review about a corn project. They worked with Adam and Eve, and there was a great example of them working together and a sort of acceptance that there was a higher budget needed in a couple of areas so that they could hire different things to make the shoot more sustainable. So, for example, a biofuel generator, so that they could reduce the impact of their generator fuel. So I think have an open mind, be collaborative is the kind of top advice, but I think having moments in the production process where you can check in, make sure that's still being kind of followed, and sort of laying out your expectations. Sorry, I'm getting really tongue-tied today.
Great. So it would be great to understand how the clients access and use the data that's provided through AdGreen. Is there one allocated person within a company that has responsibility for monitoring and potentially offsetting?
Thank you. So I think hopefully the walkthrough sort of shed some light on how to sort of access that data. So obviously you can register for an account, see what data you have, and you can download that CSV as well once you sort of have enough data that you want to review it. Perhaps using, what we did for the review is we used very simple pivot tables. Well, they were simple once we knew how to use them, and sort of did some really basic data analysis on the projects that had been downloaded from the tools. So we looked at, as you can see, sort of the average size per shoot day, what the biggest portion of the sort of projects were. So you could easily do some of that analysis too, to really sort of look at those things. And you can have any number of individuals registered for the calculator, either as admins who can see everything or users who just see what they're kind of assigned to. It depends what works best for your company. We've designed it in such a way that there's flexibility depending on how you'd like to use it. Lots of people reviewing kind of holds lots of people to account, so you kind of share that responsibility. Or it might be best for your particular organisation or department for one person to kind of take the charge and be the sort of gatekeeper or the authority person on the sort of measurement that's happening by the production sort of partners. So reviewing data is sort of a great part to add to your sort of production process, sort of as you would review budgets. So if that's part of the sort of process at the time, i.e. you get a budget in and you want to have a footprint as well, that would be the ideal sort of process from our point of view, because it gives you that oversight really up front. And offsetting would be a last resort. As I mentioned earlier, it should be sort of only considered once you've made all the reductions that you can. So obviously there's a value there in looking at that early to know that what reductions you can make and have time to actually make them. And in terms of putting that offset cost in your budget, it is given up front as soon as you put some activities into the tool. So there is a chance for the agency to be able to incorporate that into the budget. But that will depend on the size of your footprint. So the smaller the footprint, the less there is to offset, the less it will cost. And obviously we have a offset partner that we recommend, so that you can access them via the tool or directly, or you're more than welcome to use any offset partner of your choice. That is completely up to you. That is not something we generate any income from. It's paid directly to the offsetting company, so it's just a recommendation on our part if you're interested in finding out who might be good to use.
So we have, are any future iterations planned for the AdGreen calculator? We've been using it and curious whether you are open to user feedback. If so, is there a plan to gather and integrate feedback or preferred means to share it?
So we love feedback, and this is an early stage of using the tool. This is only been out sort of 18 months. We're learning a lot about how people are using it. Please email us at calculator@weareadgreen.org if you do have any feedback, or you can use the contact form on our website. We do update the calculator pretty regularly based on the responses of our users. As an example, we've recently introduced the ability to see all activities as one list and order them by size, which we showed you earlier. So you can kind of quickly spot the high carbon items. So that's to sort of facilitate more reduction. And brands can do that across all of their projects, as well as the ability to download a CSV of all projects and the sort of more minute detail about those as well. So the ability to sort of download a project list has been there for a while, but we've just added the ability to sort of get more granular data as well. And we're constantly reviewing how we can make the tool as simple but as robust as possible. And obviously we're limited by the funds we have available, but we try to pick the tweaks that will sort of have the biggest impact most quickly for the sort of most reasonable budget. So we are doing what we can, but we'd love to do some more. So please do email us if you've got ideas for us.
And what does AdGreen do with personal data and any commercially sensitive data in the tool, like the details of our production?
Sure. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of potentially sensitive data in the tool. We've got budgets. Budgetary information can be entered by those using the tool for each project. So obviously we need to look after that really, really carefully. We have a full privacy policy on the website. We've put appropriate security measures in place to help prevent personal data and commercially sensitive data from being accidentally lost, used or accessed in a sort of unauthorised way. We limit access to that data to only those who absolutely need it, and we'll process it on the basis of the sort of the legal requirements that we have held against us. Our developer that we work with is a third party, so they actually manage the tool itself, so all of the sort of security aspects are upheld on their side, and we kind of have a review on a regular basis to make sure that they're sort of doing the absolute most they can. So if you are concerned in any way, do let us know. We can try our best to answer those. We are about to, in the coming weeks, add some additional information to our terms and conditions to the tool, which will outline the sort of security standard that it's held to as well. So hopefully that will give a bit more transparency on what that involves.
Great, and we've got a question in the chat from Michael, which says, I'm finding advertisers and production companies in Canada have a low appetite to engage with the tools, feel overwhelmed with the tools, mostly just how much is on their plates. Can an intermediary fill in all the roles in the tool?
So obviously we'd prefer the tool used in a particular way, because that's the way we've designed it, but we also know what production is like. Several of the team have production backgrounds. I used to be a production manager. I know what production life is like, and I know how time pressured it is and how much things change. So I think with all of this, as I've kind of already mentioned, we'd advise that people use the tool up front so that there's a kind of basis in place for you to kind of just tweak as you go along. To answer your question whether an intermediary can do it, I'm assuming you mean a sort of sustainability consultant, for example, and we have had instances of that happening. All we do in that case is set up, if there's an external consultant working with a production company or with an agency, is we set them up as a sort of person within that organisation, but with just access to that one particular project so that they can fill out things on behalf of the production team that they're working with. So absolutely that can happen. I think in that case, we'd just love to know that there's still sort of the engagement with that production team, so that they also kind of are understanding, the impact of the activities they're doing. It's not just a kind of data entry process. There is still that engagement with it in general. So whether that's kind of a sort of part of the PPM that's dedicated to the footprint, perhaps, we've made these reductions, we make these recommendations, so there is still that sort of engagement piece. But yes, absolutely, in practice, somebody who is working with the production company or agency, actually do the work of the filling out of the information, for sure.
Great, I think we'll leave it there so we don't run too far over the 40. Oh wait, we have one more. That was in there. So do I need to wait until we have a certain number of completed projects to start reducing, so we have a benchmark?
So I think in terms of benchmarking, what we've advised a number of brands to do is have a think about how you might segment the sort of projects that you work on. Perhaps you have, I'm making this sound very simple, but perhaps you have a system where, all projects under a certain budget are deemed a certain type, all projects that are a certain size are deemed something else. So I'd say if you are new to this, get started with a sort of selection of projects that feels relevant, whether it's ones that are perhaps over £50,000 per sheet day, for example, as we kind of segmented in the annual review. And you can start just sort of having that idea of what you're going to measure. And obviously the bigger ones are more likely to have, in terms of budget, are more likely to have a bigger footprint. So starting there would be better. And there's going to be more reduction opportunities, most likely, the bigger they are. So I would recommend sort of setting a bit of a boundary around the projects that you're going to start to measure, and then looking at that sort of holistically over a period of time. So maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, sort of deciding on some boundaries for that, and then looking at that perhaps year on year to see how you're doing. But I think it would be sort of across whole campaigns and sort of periods of time, rather than a sort of project by project basis as a brand. I think there are definitely things that can be done, but you want them to be sort of not done in isolation. You want them to be done sort of holistically. So that's where sort of creating policies for the way that you sort of brief out production, having a policy of only having, 2 agency people on shoot. That's just an example. I'm just waiting for someone to come back and say that's not possible. But, sort of things like that to sort of help with an understanding of what you think is appropriate and acceptable and, in line with your own sort of company's sustainability goals. So you've got some sort of framework to put that against. So I would say get started with measuring, ring fence that if you think that's more appropriate to kind of get going, and then start to look at kind of what your benchmark is in terms of, average project size and so on.
Wonderful. That should be all of it. Yes, here we go.
Great. 5 calls to action. So before you all jump off, 5 things to do next. First of all, and if someone can be quick fire on the links in the chat before everyone heads off, that'd be great. So book a sustainable production training session, number 1. 2, register for an account in the tool. So as we said, there might be info waiting for you. Your brand might already be there, in which case there might be somebody amazing at your company you don't even know about who's already all over this. We can help you find out. Talk to your principal production partners and using our resources guides. So they are perfect for sort of pointing people in the right direction. Encourage reduction conversations, so whether that's at script stage, whether it's at the PPM, whether it's across the board for your productions for, say, 2024. And number 5, when you have enough of it, analyse the data and see where you're at in comparison to the benchmarks that we've published. And finally, if it's appropriate for you and you're in sort of, using UK-based agencies, contribute to the levy. We would love some further funds so that we can do more and offer more things to you guys. So please do consider that as well. Thank you to whoever's doing the links. I know they were quite speedy. They're coming through now. And I guess lastly, thanks to Lauren for putting these events together. This is the 3rd one we've done, and as she's mentioned, we're going to have another one for the sort of panel part of this as well. Hopefully we've got some of you G'd up to kind of get cracking on this today. We'd love to sort of see you on the next one as well. And thanks for coming along and spending 44 minutes with us today to kind of let us take you through our data. It's been nice to be able to do that.
Thanks everyone. We hope to see you in a few weeks' time.
Thanks everybody. Bye.